Hi, welcome to Adam's Real Life English, and today we're going to be learning about words that native English speakers pronounce differently from what you'll see in the dictionary. This is one of the reasons why when you listen to English, it's probably quite difficult for you to hear what they're saying because they actually pronounce many of the words differently from what you're expecting. So understanding this will help you sound much more like a native speaker, and that will make your English more natural and actually more fluent as well. So what are these sounds? What are these words that native English speakers will pronounce differently? Well, here's an example sentence. In this sentence, do you like chicken? A native English speaker would not ask you, do you like chicken? If they wanted to know that. They would actually say, do you like chicken? Did you hear the sound of the first two words? Do you like chicken? Do you? They don't say do you, they say do you. Do you? Do you like chicken? So this is what we call a weak form. So do actually has two pronunciations. One is what the dictionary will tell you, and that is do. That's the strong form. But then you can also say de, which is the weak form. Likewise, you could be you, the strong form, or y, the weak form. And in real life, most native English speakers are going to use the weak form in a lot of situations. So here, do you like chicken? No. Do you like chicken? So how do we know what words have weak forms and what words don't? It's about what function the word has. Generally, words that carry meaning, the really important words in the sentence, the nouns, the adjectives, the adverbs, these kinds of words are usually used in their strong form. They don't have weak forms. It's the words that we put in there just to make the grammar work. The grammar words, things like prepositions like at or to, things like auxiliary verbs like will or do, and also often pronouns like us or it. Also articles like a. These words, they're in there, they're important, but they don't carry meaning. They're just in there for the grammar function. So these are the words we're usually going to use in the weak form. So let's look at a couple of examples. Firstly, the United States of America. Now, of is just there really to form a grammatical function. So the important part is United States and America, the adjective, the noun, and another noun. But of, it's there for the grammar. So we can actually use the weak form, and people usually will. They wouldn't say the United States of America. No, they'd say the United States of America. The United States of America. Now, putting that together with the things we've learnt in the lessons before this, we would know that we want to connect consonants with vowels. So the way that we're actually going to pronounce it, syllable by syllable, will be the United States of America. We're going to connect the t at the end of states with the of or of, and the v from of or of will go over to the A from America, and it becomes v'America. So the United States of America. The United States of America. The United States of America. That's why we can say it so quickly, because we're connecting it like that, but also because we're using weak forms. Because to say the United States of America is much harder than to say the United States of America. So it makes it much easier to pronounce once you get used to it. So here's another example. Fish and chips. Fish, chips, they're both nouns. So we're not going to have a weak form of those. But the and in the middle, that's a conjunction. It's a grammatical word. So what are we going to do? We're going to use a weak form. And instead of saying fish and chips, we'll say fish and chips. Fish and chips. So notice that when we had the United States of America, the vowel sound was It was with v, of. When we had and in fish and chips, the weak form was and. So again, the vowel sound was plus and. So actually with weak forms in English, they always have this vowel sound. It's represented this way. We call it schwa, but the sound of it is . So let's look at a few full sentences and see where we would use weak forms to sound more like a native English speaker. So this sentence here, could you help me for a sec? Now a sec is short for second. Often if we want somebody to help us, but it's not something very difficult, it's just for a short period of time, we might say for a sec. It just means for a short period of time. So could you help me for a sec? So let's look at which words we're going to have weak forms for. Well, could. Could, it's not a main verb. Help is a main verb. So help we would definitely not have a weak form for. But could, it's actually forming an auxiliary function. It's a modal verb and we can make that weak. So instead of saying could, we just say could. We put that sound in there and it becomes could. Now you, the pronoun you, we often also use as a weak form if it's not emphasized. So we'd say could you, could you, could you, could you. Instead of could you, we say could you. Then help, we leave the same. Me, we leave like that. But then for is more of a grammar word. So we would use a weak form. So instead of saying for, we'd say for. So could you help me for? Then we've got a. The article a, we'd also use the weak form. So it becomes for a, and then sec, we leave the same. So could you help me for a sec? But remember from the last video, if something ends in or and the next sound is a vowel sound like a or we're going to add a sound in between. So instead of saying for we'd say for. So it becomes could you help me for a sec? And together, smoothly as a native English speaker, could you help me for a sec? Now, I'm sure you found it really difficult to catch each of those words when I say, could you help me for a sec? And that's why listening to English is so challenging. So getting your head around these ideas is actually really important, not just for your speaking to make it sound more like a native English speaker, but also for your listening. So we wouldn't say, could you help me for a sec? No, we'd say, could you help me for a sec? Really, really important to really get a hold of this because this will make a big difference to your spoken English and your listening. Okay, let's look at another example. This one. So, he went to bed at 2:22. 2:22, what is that? 2 minutes to 2 o'clock. That is 1:58. The time 1:58 is the same as 2 minutes to 2, or 2:22. But would we say 2:22? Well, let's look at this sentence in full. So, he went to bed. Okay, to, he went we definitely need, but to. To, again, this preposition, we're going to use the weak form. So he went to bed. He went to bed, not he went to bed, he went to bed. He went to bed at. Again, a preposition, usually we're going to use the weak form. So it becomes, he went to bed at And then to the second to, the TO2, that is also going to be a weak form. So it's going to be, instead of to, it'll be to. So he went to bed at 2 to 2. So let's say the sentence in full, slowly, as an English learner. He went to bed at 2 to 2. And now let's say it slowly as a native speaker. He went to bed at 2 to 2. He went to bed at 2 to 2. He went to bed at 2 to 2. And finally, fluently and quickly as a native English speaker would say it, he went to bed at 2 to 2. One more time. He went to bed at 2 to 2. Okay, and this is going to be fairly much the same regardless the form of English that you're speaking or listening to. So American English will do the things in a similar way as British English and as Australian English. There may be some differences in the pronunciation, but as a rule, we all use weak forms of words in the same way. And we actually pronounce weak forms pretty much the same way as well. Now, let's really focus on when to use weak forms and when not to use weak forms, because you can actually have exactly the same sentence, but the meaning will change depending on if you use the strong form of a word or the weak form of a word. So look at this example. Did you tell him? Now, if we use the weak form of you, which would be yo, we would say, did you tell him? Did you tell him? That is just asking if the person we're speaking to told some guy something. But what if the situation is different? What if we know that somebody told the guy, but we don't know who, and we're asking the person we're speaking to, was it you? Did you tell him? Then we wouldn't use a weak form. We'd say, did you tell him? Instead of saying, did you tell him? We'd say, did you tell him? So that means we're actually putting emphasis on the word you, because it suddenly becomes more important, because really we don't want to know, did you tell? We want to know, did you tell? You is the most important part of the question. So it's going to have emphasis, which means we will not use a weak form of the word. So if you hear someone say, did you tell him? Or did you tell him? Then you'll know the difference in the meaning. And when you're speaking, that's something you need to keep in mind so that you know whether you should use a weak form or not. Let's look at another example. I can do that. If you're just telling somebody that you are able to do something, you might say, I can do that. So the can, we use a weak form. Can becomes can. We add that sound, becomes can. I can do that. But what if that person then says, no, you can't? And you say, yeah, I can do that. And they're like, no, you can't. So you get a little bit angry. You're like, I can do that. So that's when you're going to use the strong form, because again, can becomes the emphasis of the sentence. It's not about me, it's about whether I can or cannot do it. So I can do that is very different from I can do that. One we use the weak form, the other we don't. So the general rule is that if you have emphasis on a word, regardless of the kind of word that it is, we will not use a weak form. However, for grammar words, some pronouns, if it's not the emphasis or the main noun in the sentence, then we would use a weak form. When it comes to other rules, however, it gets a little bit more complicated. For example, if somebody asks you this question, have you done the dishes? You might say this. Yes, I have. Now, in this case, we would say have. We wouldn't use the weak form. We wouldn't say, yes, I have. Can't do it. It has to be the strong form. Yes, I have. However, if you respond a different way and you say, yes, I've done them. Notice when I said that, them. I didn't say, yes, I've done them. Them is the strong form. I said them, the weak form. So, have you done the dishes? Yes, I have, strong form, or yes, I've done them, weak form. So, why is it? They're both at the end of the sentence. Why is it that sometimes we're going to use it, sometimes we're not? The reason is it depends on the kind of word. If it's an auxiliary verb, like will or have, those kinds of words, for example, I will do it. Will is the auxiliary verb, do is the main verb. In this case, have you done? So have is an auxiliary verb, do, done, is the main verb. So because it's an auxiliary verb, when it's at the end of a sentence, we will always use the strong form. However, when I say, yes, I've done them, that them is a pronoun. When a pronoun is at the end of a sentence, we can use the weak form. So for auxiliary verbs, always strong form at the end of a sentence. But for pronouns, we can use a weak form at the end of a sentence if the word is not emphasized. So it's a little bit complicated. And honestly, I don't really like talking about grammar too much, but it is important to understand the rules for when we're going to use weak forms and when we're not. All right, so let's just finish up by giving you a few very, very common words that we often use the weak form for. So here's a list of words that we might use weak forms for. For, and, to, of, but, do, does, are, can, could, us, you, at, have, your, should, and I could go on for even longer. There's a lot of them, but the main thing is the best way for you to learn these is not by memorizing a list. The best way for you to learn these so that you can use them in a really natural way is to listen to English being spoken more and really focus on how we are pronouncing the words. Even if it means you need to watch a TV show, play a little bit, pause, go back, listen to the same sentence again and again and again to really focus on how they're pronouncing the words. Are they using a strong form or a weak form? That can be really, really helpful because you'll begin to get a feel for the way that we use them and the way that we don't use them. Rather than just memorizing rules and lists, that's not the way to get to natural English. The most effective way to get to natural spoken English is by listening to a lot of spoken English. And then imitating that, copying it, trying to get a feel for the way that others are using it. And just knowing these rules can help you when you're listening so that you can focus your listening a little bit more. But anyway, that's the end of this one. So if you have any questions, please, I'm really happy to answer any of your questions. Leave some questions below in the comments. I'll answer every single one of them, even if you feel like it's a silly question. I believe there is no such thing as a silly question. If you really want to learn the language, anything you want to know, I'll help you with it. Also, I run English lessons online. So if you want to have a lesson with me, or even just to practice your conversation and book a time just to have a conversation with a native speaker who understands what you're going through learning the language and can help you a lot, just send me a message or contact me. you can visit the website that's linked in the About page of this YouTube channel, or just leave some comments below and I'll contact you and we can make a time. I'm definitely happy to help you out with your English learning. If you're not already subscribing, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so that you don't miss anything from this channel as I post it. And of course, hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed the video or you learnt something from it. Don't forget to ask any questions below. Happy to answer them, and I'll see you in the next video.